So it's a pretty nice day today. The birds are even actually singing out here toward the end of February in southeastern Pennsylvania. So I've taken my bike out here that I generally ride on these back trails around here. And the one thing that I'll bet other riders out there have realized is that the battery, the range of the battery, if you're going over rough terrain and the weather is colder, you may not get the same, projected mileage that they're saying. It's usually an up to number, up to 40 miles, up to 60 miles. I think this is up to 40, but I've realistically, in cold weather, riding over through ice and snow, it's only been, maybe 28 at the best. So I decided to add a battery to it, and that's why I'm making a video today. And there's several routes that you can go, and each have pros and cons. But if you decide to get a separate battery for your bike, maybe you have an e-bike that has an inexpensive battery, then that's probably the way to go. Just get a spare battery. Then you don't have to bother with all this. But then the other hand, when you add two batteries, you really don't have to change batteries. You can just keep going, and your range is greatly extended. And the battery weighs maybe 20 extra pounds. So to buy an Aventon battery is something like $499 the last time I checked, or is it $599? It's a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot more money than a lot of people spend on an entire bike. So what I did is I opted to order a non-Aventon branded battery that has the same amp hours as the bike. The first time they sent me the wrong battery with the wrong amp hour, so I had to send that battery back. I actually used another manufacturer to get this battery, but I don't know if you can see that, but that's a 48 volt 15 amp hour battery, and that's the same kind of battery that the bike has in it, and it costed way less than half of what an Aventon battery costs. So if you've gotten a pinchy situation in the future and you couldn't get Aventon batteries, you could probably make one of these work. It wouldn't look nice, it wouldn't fit in the cavity, but you could probably make it work. But a couple of things that you need when you're doing this, and if you'll notice, this battery has a nice weatherproof housing. So, if I decide to mount it outside the bike in the weather, I don't think there's going to be much of a threat there. And that's why I ordered this type of a battery. Cons are, it's a different charger than the Aventon. It takes longer to charge. But I think that's a small price to pay for having double the range. You just have to look on your bike and you have to try to figure out where to mount the battery. So I'll be going into that. But first off, let me just show you what I had to buy. And these things, there are a couple of bike shops online that are advertising these things for way, way, way more money than you should pay. I found these for a lot less, and it's a typical, as from what I understand, I did some investigation on these connectors that should be in the Aventon as well. It's the XT60H, and then there's an HL, and I think it's an HE, or the designation is male or female. So yeah, it's if you can see that, it's XT60H-F for female. And then for a male, it's going to be the same number, but it's going to have, obviously, the designation for the male, which is an M. XT60H-M. And apparently these are used quite extensively in model airplanes, like the remote control ones and such. So you don't have to just look on the electric bike market for these. You can find them, other places. But essentially you have to determine how far you need to go for the other battery and get something that's long enough. So I found that, I think that's 3 feet, or I believe this is 3 feet. It may be slightly longer than that, 36 inches. And then what you need is a combiner. And so I got this combiner. I found this on Temu, and the combiner itself, you can find these online for a lot more money from a different manufacturer that claims they're from the US and they're better and blah 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 and all that. But frankly, I don't know. They did a current test. I watched a video where they did a current test on the wattage of this combiner compared to the one that's sold in the States. It's probably still made in China, but it doesn't have the pigtails on it. It's more of just a plastic block that you plug these into. So to me, that didn't seem quite. It may be a little less, you know, a little more conserving on space, but not as easy to hook up. And you know, I just like having the pigtails and stuff. So the wattage, apparently, according to the people who make the one that they say is better, is less than the wattage that this uses. This uses supposedly more power. It's basically just a switching transistor that when one of the batteries gets weaker, the other, it switches over to the other battery, and it keeps going back and forth between batteries until both batteries are evenly dead. So that's essentially what it is, and that's why it's important to have the same amp hour for the battery that you buy. So that was the route I went. I'm going to proceed with this. I also picked up some wire wrap because I figured these wires are going to be exposed. So I got a little bit of that so that I can wrap it around the wire once everything's done. And another thing that I have found that is very useful if you're doing any of this kind of stuff is to buy a bike rack. So I got a bike rack that was capable of holding an e-bike, an e-bike, and so this should lift it up. I should be able to pivot over, in theory at least, and then I should be able to access underneath this bike, and I should be able to, you know, get it on there. Next would be where to put the battery, as I mentioned earlier, and I did check that out, and the battery will fit in this case, so that's awfully tempting. But the reason why I'm thinking maybe I won't do that is because I got these side bags for the bike that hang over each wheel, and you could essentially go to the grocery store and buy, you know, a few groceries if you had that. Whereas this, you'll get a few things in it, but not anything like the side bags. So what I'm thinking I might do is just take this off and mount the battery onto the luggage rack and then put on the side bag. So as we go, I'll let you know how all this is turning out. The next step, now that I've gotten the bike up here on a rack here and turned to an angle that makes it easy to access, there will be 3 Allen bolts on the bottom of the bike, and they come out. Now they are, some have said from me watching other people that do this, that they can be torqued pretty good. That wasn't terribly bad. If you have a decent wrench, you can get that off. And so these seem to be coming out pretty good. On these particular bikes, and probably on most electric bikes, there are Titans, which I'm going to cut loose, and I have more Titans. I can just replace them. But this is a necessary step because you have to make slack in here so that you have to take the motor connector loose as well. Anything that is keeping this inner plug from coming out, because that's where you're going to stow all of your controllers and stuff. So that's what I'm doing right now. So, and once again, the bike should be up off of the ground and in a safe position so that you can access this stuff. And don't accidentally cut any of the cables while you're, any of the good cables while you're cutting the ones that you want to cut. So I've disconnected the motor, and I've got some slack, and as you can see, it's pretty loose in there. But there's a little bracket here that runs up along here to hold the wires, and that has to be removed as well because that's keeping you from removing the bracket. So we're down into the nitty-gritty of this thing. I have the socket out. It's an aluminum housing, and you can see their 48-volt controller right here. The information that's on it. It limits current to 25 amps. It's a 750 watt rated power on this particular e-bike. And I'm going to show you something here that these things are a godsend. Magnetic wand, because if you drop a screw, you can just, the magnet will pick it up, so that makes it so much easier, because I always drop the screw. The one disappointment that I found here is that this bike does not have the plug on it that I had hoped it has. It is not that kind of a situation. It's a it looks like it's soldered on. Now luckily I have a soldering gun, but it's really not something I wanted to do. But at this point, I will do it. I just have to figure out what goes where and go from there. I'm now soldering the wires to the main primary battery. We should be able to use the plugs for the other battery. It looks like we're good that way, because the plug coming out of this controller is obviously that kind of a plug. So the main thing here is to just put plenty of heat on this and make sure that the solder is flowing into all the wires. And once we're done, we'll take wire cutters and snip those sharp ends off and make sure we do a really good tape job on this thing. In fact, there's especially really good tape. I think they call it butyl electrical tape, and I believe I have some, but that's actually better than standard electrical tape because it is such a heavier rubber. We don't want any chance of a rub through here. We don't want anything bad to happen, especially not when we're 10 or 15 miles down the road on this thing. I almost cut the legs on that plug too short. Hindsight is everything, right? But luckily it's enough and it's going to work. And since we are running a lot of wattage or amperage through these wires, we don't want any loose connections. They need to make a firm contact, and really isn't much better way to do it than soldering. The soldering is probably the best possible solution because you don't have metal to metal that can corrode. You have, of course, you have to solder it well. We don't want any oxidation. So here is the completed solder tape job there. The controller does designate 2 ins and 1 out, which is the batteries are the ins and the 1 out. So it's kind of hard to get wrong, but I'm not saying it's impossible to get wrong. So I would just double check it and make sure that, you know, the out is definitely going to the controller on the bike, and the 2 ends are obviously the 2 batteries. So, and I've connected this connector here to go out to my second battery. And just another quick heads up on this. When I connected to the controller, these 2 wires, they're soldered, and I was taping them individually, but as I was doing that, I touched them together and there was a spark. So I hope I didn't blow my controller. Maybe I'm making this easier for someone later. Hopefully it was just a discharge of some capacitors, which is most likely what it was. Because the battery's not in the unit, so there was no place for there to be any electricity other than maybe capacitors that are in this controller. So fingers crossed here that, you know, that didn't cause an issue. So here is the completed socket install, and there's plenty of room for that controller down inside of this cavity, but it is a bit of a delicate dance here to try to feed this down in, pull these out very gently, make sure nothing is pinched under here or along the strip to get everything back essentially the way it should be without anything being pinched or, you know, anything being compromised. So up to this point, we're ready now to start the next step. Swings up over the top and you have bags on either side so you can carry things. So it's a little precarious, so I'm going to have to try to figure that out, and I'll let you know. And another problem, and I knew this was going to be a problem, is that the clamps, this basically is supposed to just hook over the top of your luggage rack, or of your carrier, I should say. And what it actually does is it's made for a very thin wire carrier. So it's too small, so I most likely will have to use Velcro or Titans or something to, you know, make that work. And I kind of anticipated that. I don't really know if I like the idea of mounting the battery on top, but you know, it's just going to mean a couple of holes in the fabric, right? And that's actually going to help to hold it on. So there are some benefits to this. And I think if I can get things lined up, it should work well. So I don't know if you can see that, but I mounted the bracket. I managed to find 2 mount holes down through the bracket on top of my carrier. And I'm going to see if I can get my battery in now. Let's see how this works. So here is the battery mounted. Finally managed to get it mounted on the bike. And it looks something like this. So if that'll give you an idea. I mean, I like where it's at. It's on a sturdy place. It's mounted well. And I still have carrying capacity. So here's the workaround if you ordered one of these. Just a Titan around each one of these. And then, of course, there's a little assembly here that I can put around this part of the bracket. So I don't think it's going anywhere. So now that I've got that bag and all mounted there, I'm going to do a little bit of a wire wrap here. And if you guys know a trick to put this on, let me know. Although in my case it'll probably be too late. But this is a protective wrap to go around the wires. It also looks nicer when you're routing the wires. And so this just wraps around. It's like a protective shell. And I'll wrap this all the way down to the bottom. And if you push it up tight, it closes like that so you don't even see the wire in there. So that's sort of my goal here, to wrap this the whole way. And then we'll start to route the wires around where they belong. So here's the completed power wire to come from the auxiliary battery. I have it wrapped and I have it routed underneath the middle of the frame where it exits and comes up through. And of course I hooked it to the battery, but I'll show you from the other side. So here it is on this side, coming up through and, you know, routed up along the luggage supports. And then under here, it's just kind of Titaned up under there, and it was just enough for it to be kind of, had enough slack there that it wasn't too loose or too tight. So here I have it powered up without the main battery, just to see how the auxiliary battery works. I'm going to give it a quick test here to see. And we have it. So now I'm going to try this with the Ableton battery. I'm putting that in now. Went in okay. Energize. Actually, yep, it's on when you see the blue. And then we'll go back up here to the controller. And turn on the power. Okay, and let's turn it on to one of the settings, and there we go. Well, there's the bike all completed. There's everything done. At least I hope it's done up to this point. And I'm going to take it out for a little spin and anchor these side bags a little better on the struts. But other than that, I think I've got a pretty good carrier here that'll go quite a long distance. And I like the way that the battery turned out. What I had hoped was that this light on the back of my seat here would be visible from the back, which it looks like it is. It's just barely over the battery, so that worked out really well. Really well. So here is the rig all set up and ready to go. I've got the wide seat on there, got the extra storage container underneath, extra battery mounted here, and then the little side bags there that should turn out to be really useful for long rides.